Russell Baxter is more than just an NFL Network contributor that you've seen on Good Morning Football. He's a football historian. He writes for NFL Spin Zone, Pro Football Guru. He is all on top of what's going on in the NFL, and I'm pretty sure that he knows more information than most fans do, could even dream of knowing. And he always gives it to you straight, no sugarcoat. I want to first start with a kind of an overall picture. I want to know from your perspective, when you see the preseason, which starts officially tonight, what are the things that you look for from preseason games? Because obviously you're not going to see a lot of the starters, but I always looked at it as this is an opportunity to see what do the backups have in store. These are guys earning jobs.
Yeah, to me, the preseason is kind of disjointed. And I think we all kind of await the third preseason game when we can see the teams on the field. And even that time sometimes can be a little deceptive and so on. What I look for when I'm watching preseason games is more how the new faces and especially the rookies handle themselves. I'm not talking about their numbers. I'm just talking about, are they confused? Are they intimidated? Do they look like, it's business as usual? And again, there's only so much you can ascertain unless you're talking to these gentlemen. But see, the problem with the preseason is the way they structure it. It's, you'll see starters tonight for maybe a series. Then it's a quarter. Then it's a half and maybe 3 quarters. And then they sit them down for the fourth game. And I've always felt that that's kind of hurt the product in the beginning of the year. And the way I like to couch it is now, to me, the first 4 weeks of the NFL regular season is almost like a preseason. And and that's just, it's the way it is. It's just weird for these guys to sit down after that third preseason game. I think it kind of interrupts the flow.
Would you like then to maybe see the preseason shortened, maybe get rid of that fourth game?
I would like to see it reduced to 2 games and go to an 18-game schedule. I think the football would be better because you would play those 2 preseason games with a lot more urgency. One of the problems that football is having right now in terms of quality of play is the lack of physicality. And I know that's blasphemous to say that in some regards, but the fact that you look at these teams stumbling out of the gate. The whole premise of being a good offensive line is to be physical. And the fact that you're limited in how physical you can be, that's why some of these teams that have new-look offensive lines, it takes about 4 or 5 weeks for them to get in gear.
But do you think the players would ever go for that change? Because we know the players have been very apprehensive to make changes over the years.
Well, I've always felt that if you're the players, and listen, there used to be 6 preseason games and 14 regular season games. Then it's 4 and 16 to 2 and 18. And by the way, there's other leagues that play. The USFL played 18 regular season games. The CFL plays 18 regular season games. What I think would happen is you would have, first off, you would have to restructure the off season. Second off, you also have to expand the rosters. I don't think that is that big of a deal. But if you're going to have these guys on the field for 20 weeks, why not make more of it mean something? And I think these preseason games would be played with a little more urgency. And instead of having it seems like we more worry about rest right now than we do anything else. And that's all fine and good. I'm all for, cutting back on injuries, et cetera, et cetera. But I also think, it's like baseball. I grew up in an era where if you threw the ball a lot, you were able to throw the ball a lot. Now that guys don't throw the ball a lot in terms of pitchers, they aren't able to do it.
Also, Russell, I've heard from players, they've said, and I've heard from multiple guys say this who are retired players, they say it almost takes them an entire month to get used to being hit. It takes them time to actually get used to the contact of the game. Mm-hmm. So to me, what you're saying makes a lot of sense because if the players themselves are saying, we need the contact, we need to actually be active playing the game to be ready week 1, and there's many times that you walk into a season and you mentioned offensive lines. It might be a quarterback and a receiver. It might be a new defensive scheme under a new coordinator. It takes time for guys to actually acclimate to the changes.
Yeah, the lack of preparation, the way we prepare professional football now, or I should say professional football players and teams prepare now, just seems like it's a little disjointed. And again, I'm all for safety. Don't get me wrong. We went through that transition, unfortunate death of Corey Stringer going back some years again. And people started to concentrate on rehydration and being healthy and all that. But, the lack of contact, to me, there's a lack of hitting in the game, and I understand all that. But a lot of the nuances of just blocking are kind of getting lost as well because there's not enough pads and there's not enough hitting in practice. I mean, I know everybody, we like to joke about Allen Iverson and all that stuff about practice. It's just practice. Well, when you're playing a game where you have 11 guys on the field for the same team trying to get, in sync with each other, you need to practice. I mean, the Rockettes don't get on stage and just say, hey, let's give it our best shot.
Russell, Dashawn, tonight that the Panthers take on the Texans, we're going to see Christian McCaffrey and Deshaun Watson. I want you to talk a little bit about Deshaun Watson, kind of give your pre-draft assessment of him, his fit with the Texans, and what is your outlook for him this season with Bill O'Brien?
Well, hopefully there's a better relationship with Deshaun Watson than Brock Osweiler apparently had with Bill O'Brien. Apparently that didn't go well, and the Texans signed him to that big deal. They really didn't talk to him. It was kind of weird. They smelled of desperation. And then they were very, very fortunate to be able to cut ties with Brock Osweiler. It cost them, if you really think about it. And by the way, if Houston somehow gets to the Super Bowl, I think they're going to send the Cleveland Browns some gifts and stuff like that. Because think about what the Cleveland Browns actually did for the Houston Texans. The second-round pick that Houston gave to Cleveland was basically a way for Brock Osweiler to get taken off their hands and for the Browns to inherit him. I'm going to use a dated movie reference. Are you guys familiar with Brewster's Millions?
Yes.
Okay. Do you remember Richard Pryor had to spend money to make money?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, call it Brock Brewster. We'll leave it at that. Okay. Then here comes the 12th pick. Cleveland's got it. Who did they trade with? The Houston Texans. So next year, the Cleveland Browns have the Houston Texans' first and second round pick and enabled them to get Watson. I love Bill O'Brien, especially as a quarterback's coach, which I thought, to me, Brock Osweiler going there was great because this was a guy who could teach him. What gets lost with the Texans, and, last year their offense scored 23 touchdowns. That was 3 fewer than David Johnson of the Arizona Cardinals. They got outscored by total points in the season. They still wound up with a formidable defense. I don't think it was as good as it was ranked in terms of yards allowed. Now J.J. Watt comes back. They just need some balance in their offense. And Bill O'Brien, again, he's had 8 different starting quarterbacks in 3 years with the Houston Texans. And yet they have finished 9-7, 9-7, 9-7. That's kind of unusual.
It's interesting that you talk about Bill O'Brien, how good he's been with all these mediocre quarterbacks. I'm not saying that he's on the hot seat if the Deshaun Watson experiment doesn't work 3-4 years down the road. But is this his chance to finally put his stamp on the franchise? Like, I have my quarterback, and if it doesn't turn out the right way, is he in trouble?
Well, I don't know if he's necessarily in trouble. I think the worst thing that teams do in this league is cut bait with their coaches very, very early. The new regime in Cleveland, the smartest thing they did this offseason, besides help the Houston Texans, is not fire Hugh Jackson after a 1-15 season. How many years, did you wake up in the morning and the Cleveland Browns had a new head coach? Head coaching continuity is vitally important. You look at Bill Belichick. You look at Marvin Lewis. I know he hasn't won a playoff game, but that Cincinnati team was in the ashes before he got there. And who can deny what the Pittsburgh Steelers have done since, they were a team for almost 40 years that were horrible. Okay. And then they hired Chuck Noll in 1969, Bill Cowher in 1992, and Mike Tomlin in 2007. They are close. Within the next year and two, they would have had 3 head coaches in 50 years. Keep in mind that the San Francisco 49ers this year will debut their 4th different head coach in 4 years.
We're talking with Russell Baxter. You've seen him on NFL Network's Good Morning Football. He's also a writer and a contributor for ProFootballGuru.com and NFL Spin Zone. Russell, you mentioned continuity transitioning over to the NFC East, and that's one of the things that I look at when I look at the Eagles. You see Doug Peterson and Carson Wentz, the importance of having a quarterback, having that offense year in and year out be the same, have consistency around him. And I think that there's an opportunity for real growth from this team from last year to this year because there's no more what ifs. It's just we know exactly who the quarterback is. We know what the offense is. Everybody knows their role coming into year 2.
Yeah, and that's a contrast from last year because at this time we were all getting ready to watch Sam Bradford be the starting quarterback, and Carson Wentz got very little playing time, if I recall, during the preseason last year. Then all of a sudden it's, well, Sam Bradford's on his way to Minnesota, and Carson Wentz is suddenly the starting quarterback. And, you know, that lack of preparation, I think he was on fumes, on good fumes, and adrenaline those first 3 weeks. The offense scored 10 touchdowns. They blew out the Pittsburgh Steelers in week 3. And then things kind of settled in, and their offense wound up with just 32 touchdowns. And that's offensive touchdowns that I'm talking about, 16 rushing, 16 passing. Now you add Torrey Smith. Now you add Alshon Jeffrey. They drafted a couple other receivers. You're hearing good things about Nelson Aguilar. They got LeGarrette Blount, which how's he doing with that weight clause? Okay, and
he's on track so far, they're saying.
Oh boy, you know, if I'm Tony Luke's, I'm very upset. Hey, I wrote a piece about the weight clause and had some fun with the cheesesteaks and stuff, and I'm a Philly native and so on. And it was either Pat's or Geno's that followed me back on Twitter just for that. I'm just throwing it out there. But the balance of listen, Darren Sproles is arguably their best offensive player, okay? But there's only so much you can do. And they need a workhorse type of back who can be a little more consistent and healthier than Ryan Matthews. And I think LeGarrette Blount also brings a winning attitude to the team. He's been on teams that won Super Bowl 2 of the last 3 years. I'm very intrigued by the Eagles this year because even though they were 7-9 the year before, they were 7-9 head spiraling down. This is a team that certainly looks like it's on the rise. And listen, they were the only team in the NFC East last year with a losing record. So, but at the end of the year, they closed strong. They opened strong, they closed strong, they took their lumps in the middle of the year. Another year with Jim Schwartz's defense, another year with Doug Peterson and Carson Wentz at the helm. This is a very intriguing football team in what was the NFL's best division last year.
You know, you mentioned LeGarrette Blount. I'm looking at him. I'm looking at Sproles. I'm looking at the kid they drafted last year, Smallwood, Pumphrey this year. I see a great opportunity for them to have a rotation of running backs and not just depend on one guy. You know, kind of a similar vein to what maybe the Patriots do a little bit, where they'll use anybody. And it's basically just, all right, whoever's part of the game plan this week, it's your opportunity to have a big game. I don't think we're going to have a situation in Philadelphia where you're going to have to ask just one guy to do all the work like you demanded of Darren Sproles last year.
Well, and here's the thing. When you have a LeGarrette Blount, it gives you the luxury of a guy who can come in and get the ball 5, 6, 7 times in a row, okay? That doesn't mean you have to use them like that, but it's very, very encouraging to if you're the Eagles because you have a diverse amount of backs. You look at what New England has, okay? They had Brandon Browner and James White and Dion Lewis and LeGarrette Blount, and now they went out and got guys to replace that, Rex Burkhead, Mike Gillislee. But they all do different things. I mean, James White is not the plow horse that LeGarrette Blount is. But you also could have made a case that James White was the MVP of Super Bowl 51.
We're talking with Russell Baxter. You can follow him on Twitter at BaxFootballGuru. That's at BaxFootballGuru. Russ, there has been a lot of talk in Eagles camp, specifically Daniel Jeremiah saying that Nelson Aguilar would be the Eagles slot receiver. And then Jordan Matthews kind of had a clap back. How do you see the situation unfolding with Matthews? Is he going to get traded? Is he going to play out the season? Because, again, the organization last year extended the guys that they wanted for the long term. Jordan Matthews still hasn't received any type of extension.
Yeah, he hasn't. And, you're hearing a lot of good things about Nelson Aguilar. I'm actually literally in the process of writing a piece about the Jordan Matthews situation. And, when they got Torrey Smith and they got Alshon Jeffrey, it looked like, wow, Jordan Matthews is finally going to get some help. And now Nelson Aguilar, listen, it's a business, and Jordan Matthews is a fine receiver, and I'm sure if they can trade him and even get something for him, that's a positive for any draft choice is good. Some people, well, he should be worth a second and a third. No, it doesn't work that way when you're trying to get rid of somebody. And I don't even know if that's the cause. Okay, Nelson Aguilar certainly hasn't proved it during the regular season, but we shall see.
Looking at the Eagles this season, especially in that tough NFC East, you just referenced it that they were a 7-9 team. You feel that was going up. What do they have to do to kind of get over that hump as far as their offensive line? Lane Johnson missed 10 games last year with that suspension. They got some depth in the offseason. Is that going to be the key to the Eagles really taking that next step?
Well, if they're going to be a running and balanced team, absolutely. They got to keep those two tackles on the field. They have to be committed. And that doesn't mean you run the ball like Dallas does. Dallas, I think, is going to be a little more diverse on offense this year, because what Ezekiel Elliott was able to do for Dak Prescott was kind of wean him into eventually becoming a better passer by taking a lot of the workload. But that to me is one of the reasons I would have voted for Ezekiel Elliott as MVP last year, because of everything he did for his team. The same thing with the Eagles. They have to be a little more committed to the run. And that commitment to the run also helps their defense. It helps their play action passing. We don't talk about, we know it's a passing league now, and we don't talk about the running game like we used to 10 years ago. That doesn't mean it's any less important. Just because you get running backs now in later rounds, that's always been the case. But without a steady, I'll give you a perfect example. I mean, New England last year had a career year from Blunt. He had 18 rushing touchdowns. The year before, New England was 30th in the league against when it came to rushing. Now they got Tom Brady. But if a team knows you've got Tom Brady and you aren't going to do anything else, it makes Tom Brady a sitting duck. And that's what happened twice in 2015 when they lost to the Denver Broncos.
Russell, expanding to the rest of the NFC East, to me, going into this season, despite the fact that the Cowboys won the division last year, I think they're going to take a step back because of the fact that they lost 3 starters from their secondary, and they replaced one of them with Nolan Carroll. And, well, we saw how much of the back of the jersey we saw of Nolan Carroll last year. You have the suspensions for Irving. You have a lot of the questions about that defense, and then they lose one of the starters on the offensive line. I just don't see them replicating another 13-win season. I see them possibly topping out at 10 wins, and there's a part of me that wonders if they go on a losing streak, do they have a defense that can stop anybody? Because we know the offense can put up some points. We know they can ball control. But if that defense doesn't stop anybody, it's almost pointless.
Yeah, that's true. And they also forget David. Or how about Randy Gregory? How about DeMontre Moore? I mean, they've had more people suspended, especially on the defense. Tyrone Crawford went down yesterday. I don't know the extent of that injury yet. So they've taken their lumps on the defensive line. But I will say this, even if they had all pieces intact, winning 13 games in a row in back-to-back years, it happens. It's happened a couple of times. It's not common. It's not easy. So, even if that was the case, to me, Dallas would be like maybe 11-5 or even 12-4 type of team because of the style they play. But they have to have their young players in the secondary step up this year. It's absolutely crucial because you can't keep on hiding your defense behind that offensive line. And as you alluded to, there is a little change on the offensive line as well. Leo Collins is going to move to right tackle. He was hurt last year playing guard. He was replaced by Ronald Leary, who was the starter before Leo Collins showed in. And now Leary is a member of the Denver Broncos. So every year teams change. That's why when you look at what New England's done, you can only be impressed.
Looking at the rest of the division, to me, I'm going into this season saying I think the Giants have a very good shot at winning the division. They had a great defense last year. They got some upgrades in the offense for Eli Manning. They didn't address the offensive line, which is still a problem area. But to me, I think that this team has a great opportunity to be even better than they were last year.
Well, they got to get some balance on their offense. I know I sound like a broken record, but I think what kind of got lost in the shuffle last year, so if you include the playoff loss to Green Bay, the New York Giants failed to score 20 points in any of their last 6 games. So, you're not going to get away with that in this league in this day and age. This is not the 1960s and the 70s. I think that erratic offense, because they didn't establish the running game, and because even though they didn't give up a ton of sacks, their left tackle, Eric Flowers, had a really troubling year and so on. They need Paul Perkins, the kid who they drafted last year, to really emerge. They need some balance. It's great that they got Brandon Marshall, and it's great that they drafted Evan Ingram, but they still have to be some concerns, because we saw if they don't have that offensive balance, what can happen. We saw Aaron Rodgers light up one of the best secondaries in the league last year in the playoffs.
Russell, over in Cleveland, they have Brock Osweiler starting the first preseason game tomorrow. Deshaun Kaiser really looked like he had the leg up in that competition all last week, and then the decision goes to go with Osweiler. Do you see something behind the scenes? Are the Browns trying to still audition Osweiler, or does Hugh Jackson say, you know what, for us to have a chance at anything this season, to win any games, we need to put out the guy that has the experience?
Well, I don't read too much into who you start in the first preseason game. It depends on what you're trying to look for from the team. The Steelers are going to start Josh Dobbs. I'll go out on a limb and say he's not going to beat out Ben Roethlisberger this year. Maybe I'm just silly or something. So I don't go too much in that. That third preseason game, I think they want to watch. Listen, they know what Cody Kessler can do or can't do because he's been in the system. Brock Osweiler has not been in the system. Deshaun Kaiser hasn't been in the system. Brock Osweiler, I would suppose, I'm not sure even how long he's going to play. That first preseason game, not only you don't see a lot of starters, you wind up seeing maybe 2 or 3 or even 4 quarterbacks play for each team so they can get some game reps. So, Brock Osweiler, they made a move to get him. A lot of people thought they were strictly going to get him and then cut him. But I guess they're intrigued enough that they want to see what he could possibly do.
Russell, I want to switch to college football for a minute. We talked to David Pollack earlier in the show about who the best player in college football is right now. And me and Josh kind of discussed about Saquon Barkley versus Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson is interesting to me because he has all that dynamic traits that you love to watch on highlights, but he still struggles from the pocket. You talk to NFL people. Do they believe that he honestly has a chance to play quarterback at the next level?
I have not talked to anybody about Lamar Jackson, to be bluntly honest with you. So, I'm very, very wrapped up in the pro game and not looking ahead to next year's draft or anything like that. So any answer I would give you on that would probably be disingenuous, guys.
Russell, before we let you go, I just want to ask you one more question. What are some of the position battles that you're looking for in the preseason? Because like you said, it's not always about the stats the guys put on the field. It's about what they show you on the film in between the lines. So what are some of the position battles that you're looking most forward to this preseason?
Well, I think it's intriguing in Washington with their outside linebacking situation. They have a chance to have quite the stacked group. They've already got Ryan Kerrigan and Preston Smith as the starters. Trent Murphy came in there last year and finished second on the team in sacks, but he's gone for the first 4 games because of league suspension. They used the second-round pick on Ryan Anderson, and yet a guy who they've had on the team for 2 years who has yet to see the field, Junior Collette, has been having a pretty intriguing camp. So could he be Trent Murphy's replacement? Maybe long-term. Could he push Preston Smith for a job as well? So that's something I obviously you're looking at. We've got some quarterback battles, obviously, and what's really going to shake out in Houston. Tom Savage was a guy who did his best when he stepped in last year, but how long does he really hold off Deshaun Watson? I don't think Houston made the move they did to go up to number 12 to let him sit overly long, but I also think Bill O'Brien's going to necessarily rush him in there. And I'll be curious of how it all turns out, because I believe Dalvin Cook is starting this week against the Bills. But that's an intriguing battle with him and Latavius Murray, or who's going to be the main back for the Minnesota Vikings. That team finished dead last in the league in rushing last season.
He is Russell Baxter. You can follow him on Twitter at BaxFootballGuru. You've seen him on NFL Network's Good Morning Football. He's an NFL historian, analyst, researcher, and he has more stats and information than you do. Russell, appreciate the time today.
You got it, guys. Have a great week.